Good morning. There are 10 chapters in Esther. The 10th chapter looks small, short. This chapter seems pretty long, but I thought I'd read it. Esther 2:1. After these things, I wrote later on, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, the anger of the king went down. He remembered Vashti. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti. Esther 2:1, and what she had done. No, I won't go to the king's banquet. She refused. And what had been decreed against her. King's decree. Vashti cannot approach the king anymore. The king remembered Vashti. He looks a little sad. What she had done and what had been decreed against her. Esther 2:2. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young women be sought for the king." So maybe the king's servants are trying to distract him. Look for young, single women for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom. Oh yeah, I appoint you as officers of my provinces or territories. Yes, sir. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young women be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom." In all the areas. Esther 2:3. That they may gather all the beautiful young women to Shushan, the citadel. The officials will gather all the young, beautiful, unmarried women. Into the women's quarters under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. So Haggai, the king's servant, king's eunuch, will be the custodian. Watch out for the women of the women's quarters. The king's servants say this. That they may gather all the beautiful young women to Shushan the citadel into the women's quarters under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custody of the women. Esther 2:3. And let beauty preparations be given them. Let the beauty preparations begin to the women. Hair, eyes, skin. Then let the young woman who pleases the king, the woman who pleases the king, maybe the most, then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The new young woman will become queen instead of Vashti. The king's servants advise the king. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. I don't know if Vashti's sad there or doesn't care. Esther 2:4. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. That's a great idea. I'll do it. Let's do it. The king and his servants. In Shushan the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. Mordecai the Jew. Mordecai the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So, this is confusing, sorry. Jair was Mordecai's father. Shimei was Jair's father. Kish, a Benjamite, was Shimei's father. So Kish was Mordecai's great-grandfather. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Esther 2:6. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. So the captives were Jeconiah, king of Judah, who is king of Judah, Kish, and other captives. King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, exiles them from Jerusalem. Kish, Mordecai's great-grandfather, taken captive and exiled to Babylon. Let's read that again. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Esther 2:7. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. Mordecai raised Hadassah. Esther grew up with Mordecai, his uncle's daughter. So Mordecai's parents had a brother, so that's Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai's uncle was Esther's father, so Mordecai and Esther were cousins. She had neither father nor mother. Esther was an orphan. No mother, no father. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. Esther 2:7. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. Esther was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Esther's parents died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Esther became Mordecai's daughter. He adopted her. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Esther 2:8. So it was when the king's commands and decree were heard. Everybody come. And when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, so Hegai took care of the women, that Esther was also taken to the king's palace into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Esther taken to the palace as well. Hegai, custodian of the women. So I need to buy some tape. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custodian of Hegai, that Esther was also taken to the king's palace into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Esther 2:9. Now the young woman pleased him. The king was pleased with Esther, and she obtained his favor. She was a favorite, the king's favor. He readily gave beauty preparations to her. Esther receives beauty preparations, probably expensive, besides her allowance. Esther regularly receives money and supplies, an allowance. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Esther 2:9. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. 7 maidservants for Esther to help her. And he moved her and her maidservants. Everybody moved to the best place in the house of women. They moved to the best place in the house of the women. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther 2:10. Esther had not revealed her people or family. My family is Jewish. Esther didn't tell them about her family roots or her family. For Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. Shh, don't tell anyone you're Jewish. Maybe he ordered her. It's a secret. And every day, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters, going back and forth. I have to show you pacing sometime. We'll pace together. Esther, usually you pace when you're nervous. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters. Esther 2:11, to learn of Esther's welfare. Mordecai pacing back and forth. Esther's welfare, how is she doing? Probably worried. The court of the women's quarters. And what was happening to her? How is Esther? How is she doing? Mordecai paced to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Esther 2:12. Each young woman's turn came. First, second, third, fourth. To go into the King Ahasuerus. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months of beauty preparations. 12 months preparations. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December are complete. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation. Esther 2:12. According to the regulations of the women. So the rules of the women. For thus were the days of their preparation apportioned 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. So the preparation was 12 months, 6 months of oil and myrrh, 6 months of perfume and preparations. And I think I'll write of there. Of 6 months of. So they had preparations according to the regulations for the women. For thus were the days of their preparation apportioned 6 months. I'm not good with THs. 6 months. 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Esther 2:13. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. She took whatever she wanted from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went in. And in the morning she returned. In the morning she went back. Okay. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went in, and in the morning she returned. Esther 2:14. She returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. Shazgaz took care of the women. She would not go in to the king again. She wouldn't go back unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Come here, you. Come here. So each woman went back to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shazgaz, not sure how to say that, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines, the women of the king. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Esther 2:15. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of it's Esther's turn to go in. The daughter of Abihail was her father, the uncle of Mordecai. So Esther's father was the uncle of Mordecai. So Mordecai and Esther are cousins. I'll just say Esther's father who had taken her as his daughter. Mordecai says, daughter, and Esther says, father. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, had adopted her. Esther 2:15. Esther's turn to go into the king. Esther is next. She requested, can I have that? Nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. So she took his advice, very wise. Esther and the king's servant Haggai. Let me give you some advice on what to bring. Esther only brought the things that Haggai advised her to bring. It's Esther's turn to go into the king. She requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. Esther 2:15. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Everyone liked Esther. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus. Let's bring her in to King Ahasuerus. In the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 10th month is the month of Tebeth. In the 7th year of his reign. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th year of the king's reign. Read that again. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So I'll do a little sight here. Everybody's looking at Esther. She probably looked like Audrey Hepburn or a movie star. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Esther 2:17. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. The king loved Esther the most. And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other women. Esther obtained grace and favor in his sight. And again, I'll do a little looking at Esther. Little arrows. Esther obtained grace and favor in his sight more than the other young women. And he set the royal crown upon her head. Esther is the one. He set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So I Googled queens, pictures of queens. Esther became queen. I think this was Queen Elizabeth, a picture of Queen Elizabeth. Esther becomes queen instead of Vashti. So Vashti looks so plain there and sad. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other women. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Esther 2:18. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants. Let's have a feast, the feast of Esther, for all the servants and officials. And he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces. He proclaimed a holiday in the provinces. There will be a holiday in my territories, the king's territories. Holiday of Esther, proclaimed the king. And he gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. He gave lots of gifts. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. Okay, we just have a few pages left. Esther 2:19. When young women were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Young women were called a second time. Mordecai was in the gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people. Esther didn't tell anybody that she was from a Jewish family, just as Mordecai had charged her. Don't tell anybody, Mordecai said. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. So he raised her, so she always obeyed him. Yes, Father. Esther obeyed Mordecai like she did when she was growing up. When young women were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. Esther 2:21. In those days, when Mordecai sat within the king's gate, those days Mordecai sat, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthon and Teresh, doorkeepers, they were guards, I guess. Bigthon and Teresh were doorkeepers. They became furious. I'm mad. I'm so mad. And sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. They were kill him, I think. It almost looks like they're arresting him, but they're going to kill him. In those days, when Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthon and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Esther 2:22. So the matter became known to Mordecai. So for some reason, I drew a couple pictures with Mordecai hearing them talk. Okay, let's kill the king. But I'm not sure how he learned. Maybe somebody else told him. I must tell Queen Esther, let's kill the king, they said. And I wrote a little note. I'm not sure how Mordecai learned of the plot. There's a plot to kill the king. Who told Queen Esther, I learned there's a plot to kill the king. And I have blue paint tape there. I've run out of tape. And Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. She gave him credit. Mordecai said, there's a plot to kill you. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Esther 2:23. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, and when an inquiry was made into the matter, is there a plot to kill the king? It was confirmed. Yes, there's a plot going on to kill the king. Confirmation. And both were hanged on a gallows. So I looked this up, and two versions say they were stabbed or impaled, and two versions say they were hung. So they were killed. That's an important thing. And both were hanged on a gallows. And my last pictures are where is it? Sorry, And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So I have two drawings here, one from years ago and one probably last week. This is what happened. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And we're right here. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.